All right, now let's go into our final topic for today. We're going to be talking about the new patch 6.25. Live letter should be kicking off this Friday if you guys want to join us live. If you guys are watching this as a highlight, be sure to like and comment what you're most excited about for the latest round of Criterion Dungeons. In fact, actually latest, it's the first round of Criterion, which is going to be an interesting experience overall. We have been told that we're getting Criterion 6.25. They're going to take off the 3 series because they're going to be reworking the older dungeons, getting those into the duty support system, the trust system as well. But then the 0.4 and the 0.5 patch should also be getting their own iterations of the variant Criterion dungeons as well. And this is something that I think the community has been asking for a long time. So we thought it'd be great to sit down today, kind of talk about our expectations, predictions, our hopes for this upcoming live letter, which you can join us both on Twitch and YouTube if you want to hang out with us for the show. That's this Friday. It is already scheduled, and if you guys want to do that, that'd be awesome. But if not, we'll be summarizing it for you all here as well. Chris, what is your takeaway? What are you looking forward to seeing? Is this a piece of content that is going to be on your must playlist right away, or are you going to get distracted by Relic, which we'll be talking about the Relic system in the next live show this Wednesday? What sayest you?
So I think, first of all, this is long requested. You can go back to various media tours and you can see us ask Yoshi P the question. You can see Mr. Happy ask the question. You can see Asmongold ask the question. You can see, depending on the media tour and how far back you go, depending on the various interviewers from all the main press sites, this kind of challenging smaller group content has been requested multiple times. Yoshi P, in his own words, has said that it is not all regions are requesting it at equal rates. It's specifically been like the North American and EU communities that have requested this most heavily. But he is a global developer developing a global MMO. It's not a JRPG MMO. Like, this is a global game for a global audience. And so at some point it made sense to put this in for all regions. And so we're here, we're getting it. Mm-hmm. Now, as it's gotten closer, some things of note. First of all, this ended up being half patch content. And I think that's really important to note, because some of the early concerns were like, how is this going to work within the power grind? Because they said the item level is going to be required. It's not going to scale you. Like, you're going to want to be powerful going in. Releasing this as half patch content, I think, is really exciting, because the first thing I'd love to talk about is, what do we get from this? If it dropped Savage loot and dropped at the same time as Savage, there starts to be a real debate in our early week Savage Raiders, especially those non-world first clears. Is it going to be asked of them to do it to get their clear? Mm-hmm. Especially if we run into something like a P8 moment where you need every bit of help you can get. Is that required? But by putting it 2 months in, people have been getting their clears. They've been doing it. People have been clearing the tier. So with it being half patch content, do we get relevant? Where does the item level of loot drop if it drops item level loot?
I think it's going to be Savage tiered loot. They said, or if nothing else, they said that like Savage would obviously gear would help with the progression within this. And so is this actually a tier up, a step up in difficulty from Savage? Like, ultimately, the only way we'll know is when we feel it, right? Like, the only way you'll know is like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we're going to find out on Friday.
Yeah. But it's going to be a different kind of setup, because like even still, like Savage has been tiered around and balanced around eight men. This is going to be 4. And so it's like, with that aspect, we have limited revives and for the Criterion, and then you have like no revives.
For Savage.
Right. So it's like they're like the difficulty ends up being like, don't mess up, as opposed to like okay, yeah, we just got to retry that. And so it could be a little bit more flexible in terms of that, because now all of a sudden, when it comes down to your casters, does that mean Black Mage literally has the be all end all in Savage, as opposed to like something like a Red Mage, or do you pick up more movement ability? Like, utility shifts. Yeah, utility is going to shift to damage output. Res don't matter. So
it's like survivability. Party wide buffs are less effective than they are when they hit 8 people. Mm-hmm. So like, it all just shifts. So does class balance are there any classes that are close together? Is it enough to pass? Obviously, you're not going to see like your top damage dealer and your bottom damage dealer who are exclusively damage classes. They're not going to swap.
It'd be so wild if Machinist is like just dominating. Like it's like, oh, don't take me for this content, but I'm over here, boys. Like, let's go.
I think for that to happen, you would have to have like PvP actions where Machinist abilities just work differently in 4-man content. I don't think they're going to do that.
No.
So
what a troll that would be, though.
What a troll that would be. Joke's on you guys. Oh, you flamethrower one-shots the room. What?
Just because. Just because.
So I think the fact that it could drop Savage loot's exciting. My follow-up question on loot is then do we see it upgrade? So like Deep Dungeon, it's been this like really cool glamour with an item level. Let's say that item level is literally just linked to Savage. And whenever a new Criterion dungeon drops, it always just drops with whatever the Savage equivalent gear for that patch is. So we'll get another Criterion dungeon in 6.4, assuming 6.45 specifically. That let's assume that is also Savage linked. And that would theoretically be the same item level as the 9 through 12. Then we're going to get another Criterion dungeon with 6.5. What item level does that drop? I don't know. And so like I have questions about what they're going to do with loot, and then is the loot going to upgrade? Is there going to be an upgrade component to it? And within that upgrade, is it going to do something like the exploratory zone armors, where there is something about it that only takes effect when in Criterion as a system, something like bonus spell speed or bonus to, I don't know, res actions. I literally don't know. Is there something about that loot that's unique, and is that something you'd want?
For me, anything that does the level upgrade and anything that gives me those additional skills. Yes. Like that's one of the arguments that I've continually made is like, I would love nothing more. Like we're not going to have them redesign the whole game around gear and perks and things like that. We're not going to be bringing in sub jobs, etc. in terms of that. However, the Lost Actions does give a little bit of that flavor. Gear could do that, but just like with Bosha's Adnor, we saw gear that had perks just for the content, right? And so I would love to see some systems along those lines. Honestly, the thing that would really just have me so excited is that all of a sudden they said, hey, all these different relics that we've had in the game, like you can use those and bring them in here, and each one has a different perk that you can then choose to go and do. Again, this is optional content, not required.
Brian's got that blank check,
dude. Yeah, I know. I spend so much invisible money like for game design. But imagine like all of a sudden your ARR relic gave you a perk and it changed the way that you could approach that from a solo or like because especially on the variability, it has like the ability for you to solo challenge it as well. So like when it all comes to fruition, like I would love to see some of this content become a playground of ideas to see what exactly resonates and doesn't. And being that it's optional, not required, you would never have this pressure to go on, hey, I got to go grind out this Heavensward relic so that I can do this content so that I can then go do this other content. Like the system isn't stacked up like that. And because of that, it gives you that level of flexibility. But it would be really cool to see, especially if all of a sudden you're like, oh, the relics are now more than just glamour. Like that's where they go. And that's what we'll talk about in our show tomorrow or Wednesday, like about the relic system. So it's like, yeah, like I think that would be, so that would be my, spending Square Enix's money, willy nilly, spare no expense. We gave Brian the checkbook and so
he just kept putting zeros on there.
Some zeros, baby. But I think essentially with Lost Actions, I think that's going to make up for that, and that's going to be interesting to see, because does that then allow for more flexibility in terms of your composition? I already see chat sounding off on like what comps do they think are going to be most valuable. Well, being that anybody can raise a normal Criterion and you have no raises in Savage version of it, it's like that in my mind is like, how are we going to address the comp of that? Imagine sitting here being looked at and saying, you're a red mage, we don't need you, because we cannot use the thing that you bring, which is that instant res. Are you able to augment that with something else as a lost action? That's what I'm hoping for, that we see on Friday.
They balanced healers in PvP without necessarily shifting. Like they didn't have to lead them as healers, so like they could move to a system. I don't think they will. I don't think they want to have yet another set of balance they have to keep track of. Mm-hmm. So I think they'll function the way that general PvE does. So gearing is the logical way to have minor adjustments that are mode specific. And they have said you're going to want the Savage gear going in. So I do wonder if there's like, is it fully clearable without Savage loot equipped? And like you and I aren't sitting in BIS anymore. So like we were in pre-Savage BIS, but you and I are missing a lot of Savage loot. So there is a real question to like, are you and I even going to be able to handle the highest difficulty? And if not, are you going to be able to kind of get maybe easy to get tome gear replacement from variant, and then Criterion will allow you and I to start getting Savage loot? And then if that's the case, what does Criterion Savage drop? Right. And so like maybe that gives access to another source of the weapon. So there's just a lot of like minor detail questions, but I assume it's going to drop it just from the phrasing that Yoshipi's used. I assume it's going to drop Savage equivalent gear. And that it is meant to be attempted with some Savage gear already equipped. So it sounds kind of like the relationship between Mythic Plus and rating in WoW, where they benefit each other, except less of the mandatory because they're separated by 2 months.
Yeah.
So
do you think we're going to see like a world first mentality in terms of racing within the game as this content gets added?
I mean, Svea talked for like an hour on stream the other day about the spreadsheets he has for Island Sanctuary. So yes. I think that's absolutely the case. That people are going to want to push this down just like they do with Deep Dungeon. And they're going to want guides or whatever, and with the different variables, like are there different bosses, are there different, like how variable is it? Because they've kind of given us some loose phrases, and I think people were reading those, we're all reading the same words off the screen, but we're all getting a different meaning out of them.
Yeah.
So once we get in there, like how much variability is there, especially in those versions where the path is fixed? Because in the higher difficulties, it seemed like the path was fixed, as opposed to variant was really like choose your own adventure. Is what it sounded like. So yeah. I don't know, are we getting just 3 bosses? And then once you beat those 3 bosses once on Savage, that's kind of it. And we don't hear from them again on this content until 645. I don't know.
Yeah. How cool would it be? And just, this is speculation, guys, is that, we talk about variant having different pathways, Criterion having fixed, and then obviously Savage being fixed. How cool would it be if they ended up saying like, okay, yeah, variant has all these options, and then each week or whatever, this is the pathway for Criterion, and the next week it's a different pathway. Yeah.
So it's a static weekly path.
It's a static weekly path, so that essentially like you can challenge the content, and then boom, 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 boom.
Like Unreals.
Well, yeah, exactly like Unreals, but also like imagine that weekly, like, oh, cool, this is gonna be great to challenge it, and that would be something neat, because no matter what, if there is like a variant, the ability to have changes gives you that level of flexibility that is a little bit different. One of the problems that we have with dungeons is that they're just this set path. And yes, they're bringing that system and evolving into a set path. But I'm like, man, how neat would it be to be like, this week's path A, this week's path B, next week's path C, repeat, like.
So Mythic Plus kind of does that with their modifiers. The modifiers rotate, and then your keys determine which dungeon you get. So there is that, like, you're being told what to do. So in that aspect, it's static. But if you're always doing what you're told, you're having different experiences.
Yeah.
And I think New World, your guys are having that too, right? I don't know what you call your modifiers, but you're having that different.
Yeah, mutators.
You're having these different kind of swaps to the dungeon. So they could do something like that. I think Unreal sounded like it was going to be more variable than it has been. It's turned out like each patch we get one boss, and then once that boss goes away, it doesn't come back. And originally when it was presented, it sounded like it was going to be this like rotating, and there might be 2, and once we get enough of them, we're going to start mixing them back in. And like that hasn't turned out to be the case. And we didn't get one with an expansion launch because they're like, hey, that's already too much on our plate. So like it'll be interesting to see what this is. I think that gets answered when we're looking at like 645 or 655. I don't think anything about the way the first one works is going to tell us what this looks like in 7.0, 8.0, and beyond. That's something that it's going to probably kind of grow into, and we'll get used to whatever this normally is. But that starts to beg the other question I have about longevity. Deep Dungeon on launch was something that people took a lot of interest in at every level, and as it aged, the primary vocal interest that I hear are people that are taking it extremely hardcore, trying to do solo clears or first-time full clears or something like that, or people that are using it as a leveling method. So there's kind of like these two primary methods that sum up the majority of what I hear people using Deep Dungeon for once it becomes old.
Yeah.
What does this look like when it's old, right? When that item level doesn't really matter anymore, if the item level is part of the initial draw.
Achievements, mounts, they have already certain kind of rewards. My hope is that there is that future kind of planning baked into this kind of system, right? Because that, I think, gives the game its longest, and strongest outlook, right? Because, we've got hundreds, almost 100 dungeons, if not already. And then it's like, okay, well, what are those being used for? And I love it when I see a dungeon I haven't run in like 2 years, right? Because it's like, oh man, I remember this. This was fun. And then now it's like, I wish we had that, because it's like the current ones they just kind of you play and you move on. And so with it, like, I do hope that we see, like, come 0.4, 0.5, that like all of a sudden as a series, maybe there's things that you can do and things that you can challenge and things that you can, provide that variability. Maybe we'll see, like we see with the Deep Dungeon system, of like, oh, can you clear this with, these certain things, these certain conditions? Something you've always said, like, imagine being able to put your own modifiers on yourself and be like, okay, I'm going to challenge it this way. And just having that variability, I think, is going to add a lot of flavor. Not that it's going to be the most popular content always running. Not that it's the most popular content always running, but it literally will be the like content that people want to play. It's like, so it's like, hey, yeah, there's definitely a community that's into this,
As long as, like, ideally in my mind, we would start setting things up to have an Unreal version.
Yeah.
We would build them as Unreal ready. Because I think when they're doing Unreals, they're having to go back and make all these adjustments. So if you think of those as like sliders in your settings, hopefully they're setting all those sliders up now so that we have the ability to bring back previous criterions over and over and over. And so ideally it's like, hey, we don't know what the combat system changes are going to look like in 7.2.5 or in 8.2.5. But it would be nice if Sildine Subterrane could be kind of brought up to speed. And so ideally they've kind of baked a lot of those adjustments in from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because reworking the old ARR dungeons and stuff has sounded like a huge task that they've undertaken.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is like, yeah. And we thought it would be fun to re-release Sildine Subterrane because we're doing something else with Belladia in 8.0, whatever. And so, like, it's like, cool. And there's lore tie-in. And so we're going to bring this back. And there's going to be some even more new mounts or whatever. It would be really neat to see that happen, because that's what allows them to keep patches really beefy without overworking devs. Is they're like, oh, and here's what we worked on. But then I also got to throw all these other things on top because those were relatively easy on our end.
Exactly.
I hope that's the case. I will tell you, dungeons, like old dungeons, as somebody that's going through story for my first time, I'm done with all of Heavensward main story. But as I've been going through all these optional dungeons, the 60 dungeons, I also have the same thing at the 50 dungeons. I'm sure I'll have the same thing at the 70 dungeons. I never do my 50, 60, 70 roulette. I never do that one. And so a lot of these dungeons, I'm hitting them for my first time understanding the lore, but it feels like I'm also getting a new dungeon, because in many times I haven't seen that dungeon in probably 3 or more years.
In years. Like, we're not talking like, I ran it 2 weeks ago. No. Like, I was like, oh my gosh. What? And then you're like, oh, trying to remember mechanics. And in some of these, like, reworks, like, I'm like, I don't even know the new mechanics here. This is exciting. Awesome. We literally did the Snowcloak as a community game night. We were running that, and we got into Snowcloak, and we're like, wait a minute, how's this? Wait, what? All right, this is different. Like, trying to know it and remember it, and it's like it's conflicting with what I remember it to be, and so that was actually really exciting and thrilling. And like, I get the idea, like, you want to have something that people, is comfy, like we have comfy content, and but at the same time, like, difference and change in and of itself is something that keeps you going back to the well. If it's just for comfy content's sake, like, we have so much content, we just let hit the floor. And then we just like, well, I guess we'll see you whenever it gets RNG'd into whatever.
And maybe in 7.0 is just a hypothetical. I'm going to write one of the Brian blank checks now. What if every dungeon that releases has a Criterion version, and that starts to set the trend? And now the new Mediator question is, when are you going to give old dungeons Criterion versions?
Right. And that'd be cool. So that'd be really cool.
You just start going back and picking really iconic dungeons, or maybe they only do it with all the optional dungeons because they don't get as much love.
Armvale,
Armvale Criterion Savage.
Yeah.
You got to keep your stacks of fruit up the whole time. So like, you could do weird stuff. And so, like, I'm really excited for what this system opens up as possibilities. We'll find out Friday during the live letter. I believe that Friday's live letter confirms the patch date to be the 18th of October,
which is now the confirmation date of the New World update. So it's either gonna, and I actually am starting a new job, so like I'm gonna be up early and have to do some Final Fantasy, and then I'll have to play some New World at night because I'll be at work. So, woo, what a day! Gonna be nuts.
Gonna be a big day.
Yeah, gonna be a big day. A couple questions from chat, and then we can wrap up the show itself.